So fertilization is the combining of the male sperm plus the female egg, right? But we're not there yet. What we've gotten to is pollination. Here's pollen. It landed on the stigma. So now we need to look at how the sperm actually goes and finds the egg. The sperm is held within the pollen grain. So this is the male gametophyte. So at this point, we are going to be in our haploid gametophyte generation. So the pollen grain consists of an outer wall. So here's the outer spore wall. And that outer spore wall is diploid. That comes from the parent plant. And then inside of this, there are two cells. We have a pollen tube cell. So this is the tube cell. And then inside of the tube cell, there's another nucleus called the generative nucleus. Gen means beginning. This is going to become the sperm cells. So a pollen grain is the generative cell and the tube cell, both inside of the spore wall. The female gametophyte is where the eggs are located. So the female megasporophyll is going to make a megaspore. And just like when female humans do meiosis, instead of making 4 eggs, we make 1 egg. So just like female meiosis in here, are going to make 1 megaspore, which is going to eventually divide into 8 cells. So these are all haploid, again, so we're in the gametophyte generation. So here are the 8 cells. We have 3 antipodal cells, 1, 2, 3, and we don't really know the function of those. There is 1 egg cell, so here's the 4th cell, and this egg cell is going to be located near the micropyle. The entire female gametophyte is surrounded by 2 integuments. So 1, 2. These integuments are diploid. These are from the parent plant. And these integuments have an opening on one end called the micropyle, where we're actually going to be able to see the sperm enter into here for fertilization. So it makes sense that the egg would be right here next to the micropyle where the sperm are going to enter. We have some more cells. There are 2 synergids here, so this is 5 and 6. And these synergids are going to release proteins that attract and guide the pollen tube. So these attract the pollen tube so that the sperm can actually get to where the egg is. And then in the center, we have 2 polar nuclei. And this isn't really a cell. These are just 2 nuclei hanging out. The rest, this is kind of like one gigantic cell, and the rest of this is all in here. So these 2 polar nuclei are going to be really important during fertilization, because these are going to lead to the endosperm, which is the food source for the growing embryo. So the female gametophyte is called the embryo sac, and it's made up of these 8 haploid nuclei. So we have to get from pollination is this pollen landing on the stigma, to fertilization, where we have sperm meeting with egg. And there's a long physical distance between this, because the pollen tube has to grow all the way down through the style, through the ovary, to the ovule. So the pollen tube lands here. That tube cell is going to swell up, and it's going to navigate its way through the style all the way down to eventually the micropyle. And it's able to do that because the synergids, are these cells down here, are secreting compounds that attract the pollen tube and say, hey, come here, we've got an egg waiting for you. And then behind it, we have the sperm, the generative nucleus. So the generative nucleus will divide, into 2 sperm cells. So every time we see fertilization of a seed, we're going to actually have 2 fertilization events, 1 for each sperm cell. So both of those sperm are going to travel all the way down here until they get to the micropyle, which is the opening in the bottom of the female gametophyte. So you can see here's the embryo sac that we just looked at, and those are those 2 polar nuclei and the egg. And each of these is going to get fertilized by a sperm cell. Over here, this is a pollen grain, and this is a pollen tube growing out of that pollen grain under a microscope. All right, plants have a really cool fertilization event called double fertilization because it is going to happen 2 times for every seed. So this is the fusion of gametes. This is eggs meets sperm. 1 sperm fertilizes the egg. So that's the first fertilization event. That's the one you were probably expecting when you came into here looking at fertilization. The other event is going to be when 1 sperm combines with the 2 polar nuclei, and it's going to give rise to a triploid, which means 3N endosperm. And the endosperm is the food storage that we need to have in a seed. All right, so here we can see 1, 2. Those are 2 sperm cells. My first sperm cell 1 is going to go here and fertilize the egg. This is going to make my zygote, right? So this becomes 2N zygote, which is going to eventually become the embryo, which is my baby plant. My 2 polar nuclei are just kind of hanging out here in the center of this really big cell. So my second sperm is going to come here and fertilize those, leading to this triploid cell, which is going to become the endosperm, which makes up the food source for the new baby plant. If you can imagine, seeds are packed with a ton of energy. Seeds have a lot of calories. That's a lot of energy that the plant has to put into this to make a new baby plant. Why not put that much energy into every seed? Because it's a waste of energy. Double fertilization is a really cool adaptation which allows the plant to only put the energy into making a food source if it knows it's going to get an embryo out of it. So instead of having a whole bunch of food available and only some of that food gets eaten, imagine having a buffet and you don't know how many people are coming, so you put out a huge big spread and some of the food doesn't get eaten, all that energy goes to waste. With double fertilization, only the zygotes that are showing up get the food. So none of the food goes to waste. You make all of the food to order for the zygotes that show up. So this way, the plant is able to conserve energy for reproduction because reproduction is very expensive energetically, and only provide a food source when there's actually going to be a baby plant to feed.